personal views and opinions expressed by our podcast guests are their own and are not legal advice or official statements by their organizations. Hello, my name is Debbie Reynolds. They call me the Data Diva. This is the Data Diva Talks Privacy podcast, where we discuss data privacy issues with industry leaders around the world with information that businesses need to know right now. I have a special guest on the show, Keith Budden. He is the managing director of Ensurety in the United Kingdom. Welcome to the show.
Thanks, Debbie. Yeah, great to be here. Really looking forward to it.
Yeah. Well, I had the pleasure of being on your podcast, which is the GDPR Weekly. It was a fun time, and I thought it would be great to have you on my podcast. I'm a baby podcaster compared to you, what you've been doing. You recently had a great milestone. You're on almost or over 200 episodes of your show now. You've had over 75,000 downloads, and you also have a book out on Amazon, right? GDPR Made Simple.
That's right. Yeah. The book is doing very well. And basically, I managed to get the whole GDPR into a book which is 150 pages long. Will it make you a GDPR expert? No, it won't. But will it make your business GDPR compliant? Yes, it will. So, you know, so yeah, there's still a need for people like me. I'm not going to do myself out of business by putting all my secrets in a book. But yeah, I mean, for most small businesses, it will give them everything they need to become GDPR compliant. And that was my aim, was to put it in everyday English that you know, wasn't legalese, that people could just pick up and run with.
Yeah, I don't know how you feel about this, but I feel like some people purposely try to make things like GDPR more complicated than it should be. Is it me?
No, I don't think it's you at all. Yeah, I would agree with you. I have a pet hate, which is those people GDPR or indeed CCPA or you know, things in the States, where they concentrate on all the penalties. They're like, you know, you've got to do this otherwise, you know, someone's going to come around and confiscate your dog and sell it on eBay. It doesn't happen. You know, for your average small business, yeah, the penalties are there. Of course they are, and they're important. But actually, do you know what? Don't concentrate on those. It's a bit like, you know, I suppose in the same way, Debbie, about data breaches, isn't it? You know, it's the big high-profile ones that hit the headlines, whereas in fact, the sending a bill to the wrong person in the wrong envelope is probably much more common, but is never going to make the front page of the New York Times because it just isn't that relevant.
Right. And I think those other places where people fall down on these regulations is not the most sexy story, but it's probably the most common. So like an example I'll give is like a lot of people like to talk about insider threats within organizations about like data breaches and stuff. But I saw a study recently that said only, you know, when they talk about insider threats, they think about like some, you know, disgruntled employee or whatever. And I saw a statistic and they said almost never is it a disgruntled employee.
Yeah.
So I was like, you're like focusing on, oh my God, this person is disgruntled and they did this thing. And also not all insider threats are nefarious, right? So a lot of them are mistakes that people make. There are gaps that are there. That's probably the most common way that people have problems. I try to tell people this a lot.
Well, exactly. I mean, I always liken it. Yeah, I always tell people about how important it is that you record any data breaches that you have, however minor, that you make a record of them. And at the same time, though, you ought to look on that as the same way as in the company. You might look on your accident book. Yeah, if you've got someone whose job is posting out invoices to people, and every week when they do it, they cut their finger on the paper. You don't fire them because of that. You buy them a thimble to put on their fingers so they don't cut their finger. And I think it needs to be the same logic. You know, to me, a data breach register is not about penalties, really. It's about, let's identify the needs for training within that organization of what are people they're commonly doing wrong. And you know, a bit of training then to say, actually, do you know what, if you didn't do it this way, if you did it slightly differently, actually you'd solve the problem. And it's one of my pet sayings. I think I might have said it when we spoke last time, but to me, data privacy, if you look at it right, is a mindset, not a rule set. And if you can get the mindset right, then the rules are simple.
I agree with that, right? I tell people, like, don't get all tangled up into the fine details of everything. It's like, if you, for example, if you understand the data that someone gives to you is not your data and you have an obligation to take care of it, that will cover almost any law that you can think of, right?
Yeah,
so
absolutely.
If you just don't do those bad things, you'll be part of the way there already.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, so again, similar vein. There's something I always say to people is, if you got a bit of data about someone, whether it's on a computer or whether it's on paper or whatever, think about that as if it was your data. And if you want, think about it. If that was my data, would I be happy with that, whatever the processing is, whatever that is happening to it? And if the answer to that is no, well, then why should anyone else be? Yeah, and I think if you can get that mindset of, as you say, treat each piece of data as it's valuable and that you guard it, and you treat it with respect, then you're not going to go far wrong.
Yeah, I know. It's so funny. So when the GDPR came out in May of 2016, I had been watching the law brew for a while, and I thought, I'm the only person I know of in the US even interested in this at all. And I thought, when I woke up on the morning of May 25th, 2016, all of a sudden it would be all the news and everyone would care about it. And like, there was like not a story anywhere in the US. Like, I looked at all the press, all the trades, and no one was talking about GDPR. And I'm like, this is like a huge major thing. And so people didn't really, so I thought, okay, well, between 2016 and 2018, I made it my mission to start to educate people about that. And eventually, a reporter called me from a news agency around in May of 2018, and they started talking about it, right? But I think the U.S., I can say this because I'm an American. My view is that the U.S., the way businesses think about issues like this is very reactionary. So no one really cared about GDPR until the fines came out. Because if you think about it, in my view, the GDPR isn't that different from the data directive.
Yeah.
So it's like that was out for a long time. So when people started complaining, I'm like, so what were you doing before?
No, I think you're absolutely right. And I think part of that, if I'm honest, I think the regulators brought upon themselves, because I think there was all the fuss before it came in on 25th of May 2018, 4 years ago now, and there was all this anticipation before it came in, and it was great times for me, in terms of training people and things. I was beating clients off with a stick, but then all of a sudden, of course, it came in and nothing happened. Yeah, and I think the general feeling amongst the general business community was probably, in fact, some people said it to me, oh, it's just another millennium bug, isn't it? It's a load of hype talked up by you people that, in fact, was actually nothing. Yeah. And I think the authorities didn't help themselves there, certainly here in the UK. But now that people can actually see companies being fined on quite a regular basis, then I think now it's concentrating the mind, because now they're thinking, oh, actually, I don't want that to be me. And I mean, I'll give you an example. One of my clients is a soccer club, Blackburn Rovers Football Club. And I still remember the first meeting I had with them where they said, your job here is to keep us on the back pages and off of the front pages. And I thought that was a really good way of putting it. That their concern was not actually financial; their concern was reputation. And again, I often say to companies here, actually worry a lot more about the reputational damage than about the fine, because the fine is tomorrow's chip paper. It's gone. But the reputational damage can take you months if not years to recover. In fact, some companies probably never recover it. And I think sometimes that's underplayed of what that damage can do to you. You take Capital One as probably an example. In Capital One, I think you're also active in the US. But those of us in the industry now are very aware of the fact that they've had more than one issue with data. And, suddenly like, well, would you give your details to Capital One? Probably you'd have some doubts about it, Now, okay, that hasn't seeped through probably into the general public perception quite so much. But with, again, it's about perception. It's about reputation. And it's about making things work. And at the end of the day, I mean, when I work with clients, I always say to them that I'm going to come up with 3 lines of action. Yeah, I'm going to come up with the things you need to do straight away because actually you're breaching the regulations on how you're doing things at the moment. Things which you're doing which actually you need to improve, and we can work on those over the next 3 to 6 months. And then other things that actually, if you want to be 100% compliant with GDPR, you should do. But actually, I would never lose any sleep over them because actually, probably less than 1% of the companies in the world do that anyway. And hand on heart, do I believe that any organization is 100% GDPR compliant 100% of the time? No. I don't even think the ICO is 100% GDPR compliant 100% of the time.
I think also we need to get past this idea that somehow if I create all these policies and all of a sudden I'm done. Yeah. With GDPR, it's kind of about what you do, like what actions are you taking? So you can have all the most perfect policies, and then if you don't follow what you say you do, that's worse, So I think people need to get out of this idea that, okay, all I need is a template and I fill this out and I put it in a drawer somewhere and then I don't do anything or I don't follow anything that I say I do.
Yeah, I absolutely. I 100% agree with you there. Yes, of course you do need the policies. But as you say, it's the application of those policies which is actually the important bit. There's no point having a data retention schedule that says you destroy your data every year, and in fact, no one does. And 10 years later, you have an audit, and suddenly the authorities find you've got lots more data than you said you had. You've got yourself a big problem. In fact, you'd almost probably been better not having that policy,
right?
And you're having one which you're just ignoring, because. And the other thing is, I think, and this is something which I've been saying to my clients recently, is, have a fairly obvious thing that you update, which is the privacy policy on your website. Because, I find for myself, if I go onto a website and I see a privacy policy which is still talking about things pre-GDPR,
right.
I'm straight away that that company or that organization doesn't get it. Yeah. Whereas if I go on that and it says last updated December 2021 or something, I'm like, oh, okay, they're probably on the ball. Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's little things like that because the authorities, however big they are, however good they are never going to have the resource to investigate everybody. It just ain't going to happen.
Right.
And I think also that's part of the problem the authorities have had, certainly up until probably 12 months ago, was very much that they were being reactive rather than proactive. So, they got 10 complaints about a company, so they go and investigate what was going on. But they weren't actually looking for organizations. And indeed, something I raised with the ICO myself a few months ago, when we were talking about changes to UK GDPR, was I said, I think we're in the wrong place. I'm very much a believer of, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. And the bigger issue is that even today, 4 years on from when it came in, best estimates are in the UK that only 25% of companies who should be registered for GDPR have actually registered. And that, to me, is a far more worrying statistic than should we be tweaking a little bit with the legislation.
I agree with that, right? You want people to get on board with what's happening, right? I agree. So before you can start making changes and tweaks, you need to get people fully on board with what you're doing right now. I I want your thoughts about this. So I love to talk with people who are out in Europe, because in the US, we have a very different view, obviously, of the way privacy or data protection or whatever you want to call it, we think about here. But there's something that comes up in debate with people a lot, and I want your thoughts on this, and I can tell you my thoughts. So I've had people who are kind of data privacy officers in Europe, and I've heard them be upset when, let's say, they gave a company a particular type of advice and the company didn't take their advice. They were like upset as if what they said, like the company had to take their advice. So I don't know what you think. I can tell you what I think about that, but I want your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I get that in a way. I get that, if you give a company advice and they ignore you, then that's frustrating. Of course it is. But I guess there's two parts of that, really. I guess if I took the purely pragmatic view, I'd say, well, as long as they pay their invoice, do I actually care? There's more fish in the sea. And to take an old saying, you can lead a horse to water, you can't make it drink. But what I've found with that is that if I'm getting that reaction that I find that people are, unfortunately it doesn't happen that often, but if I get that reaction where I think that they're just not taking it seriously, then I think it's incumbent on the DPO to be forthright enough to say you're not taking it seriously. And I have actually only with one client I've needed to go this far, but I've actually written a letter to them with a copy to the ICO saying that, I've provided all the information. They are not taking it on board. Therefore, although they've got policies that have been written by me, I'm absolving myself of responsibility for what they do with them. Because, if they really, really don't take notice, then, you're on a hide into nothing. I had a very real world example of this last week. I had a company. I had a company who I hadn't done anything towards GDPR. I gave them a set of policies, which is a fairly chunky amount of documentation. I rang them 3 days later to say, could we set up an appointment to actually go through the documents, make sure they understood them. Oh, we don't need that. We've read them. We're all fine. Yeah. No way. I just don't believe them. Yeah. I think from where you were, where you had nothing, and now you've got all this, and you're telling me that 3 days after I sent it, only 3 days, you've read all that and you really thoroughly understand it. Okay, I like to think I'm good at writing things, but I'm not that good. Yeah, it's about a sense of realism, really. Well, what's your thoughts on it then, Debbie?
Yeah, I agree with you. You can lead them to water, but you can't make them drink. You can give the advice. I think it's important to document what that advice is. And like you said, like you did a letter, or you can even create a document for yourself to say, this is what I did. This is what I agreed to. This is kind of what happened. But I think at the end of the day, the company has to decide what their level risk appetite is. And then for you as the advisor, you need to document sort of what you said and when you said it.
Yeah, I think you're right, and I think you touched on something very, very valuable there, which is risk appetite. Something I've had that with a company actually I'm working with at the moment, where I started a meeting with them just this morning, and one of the things that came up there, we were talking about one part of their operation where they've only got a handful of people working in that organization, in that part of the organization. And they've recognized that part of the organization is not at all GDPR compliant at the moment. But it's a small number of people. The only thing is a small number of personnel records. They don't have any personal clients or anything. It's a B2B operation. And so I said to them, well, at the end of the day, it depends what your risk appetite is like. If you're going to say, well, actually, there's only 5 people there, they're very subdued. In fact, we even forgot about them when we were asking you what to do, and so we haven't included them. If you think, actually, do you know what, I'm not going to spend any money or time and effort on them, I'm just going to take that risk that, you know, the chance of something happening there is so small, I'll live with it. Well, that's your risk appetite. And what I said to the client this morning was, I can't tell you to do that yet. And there's no way on God's earth I will put that into writing to you to say, you know, that's your choice. But reality is that's your choice. Yeah, I can't make you do it. And nor would I want to, really, because, you know, at the end of the day, life's too short. That's not what I'm here to do. I've got enough people who do want to, fortunately, enough people who do want to do what I tell them to do. I don't need the ones who are doubtful. Yeah. So you know, so make your own mind up. Yeah, what's your risk profile? And of course that's going to vary from company to company, from organization to organization. So some organizations by their nature are very risk averse, and that's fine. Some, you know, I mean, if you're talking to a company, I don't know, let's suppose who are futures trading, their risk profile is going to be very different to a charity. That's you know, and it's finding where are you comfortable with that risk? Because let's face it, all of us who are in business every day, whatever we do, is about risk. Because if we only ever made the right decisions, we'd make decisions a lot quicker. And, you know, the fact of life is we don't always make the right decisions. But, you know, sometimes we make decisions and we get it wrong. And there's a risk in doing that. But what do you feel comfortable with? Yeah. You know, if I'm driving my car and I park it somewhere that I shouldn't, but I know I'm only going to be 5 minutes, I might decide that's a risk worth taking. I'll risk getting a ticket for that. But if I'm somewhere where I'm going to be gone away from the car for 4 hours, I'm only to take that risk. No, because the risk is too high. The chance of getting a ticket is too strong. Now, okay, you could take an idealistic view, a very holier than thou view, if you like, and say you should never do that. But fact of life is that we're all human, we're all fallible, and you know, show me a person who's never done something they shouldn't, and I'll show you a liar. Because you know, at the end of the day, we all have at some point. It's a question of magnitude.
Right. I agree with that. I would love to talk a bit about the human side of working with companies on policies and procedures and things they should do about GDPR. I've seen people who feel like, okay, I'm going to come in with this fistful of policies and I'm going to tell everybody what to do and they're going to do what I tell them to do. And they pretty much go down in flames. Like that is such not a helpful way to approach talking with people and getting to know them. Because I mean, really, you're only going to be as successful as people are comfortable with sort of talking with you and giving you information. What are your thoughts? What's your experience there?
Yeah, I'm 100% with you, because actually it's interesting. One of my largest clients, that they're a FTSE 100 listed company, massive company. They actually said to me that one of the things they'd been impressed with me about was that between me first talking to them and then me actually starting working on policies with them, I spent several days of my own time at no charge to them, finding out what they did, actually investigating them as a company, getting under the skin of the company and finding, how did they work? What were they doing? Where were they based? All these sort of things. And they said that they actually took that very much to heart, and they would kindly recently gave me a testimonial for it, because they said the fact that you did that then meant that when you put the policies together, or when you were talking to us about what the policies were going to be, we didn't have to spend time explaining what we did, because you'd already done that. We could spend the time talking about how did we apply what the rules were to what we were doing. So that, so they said, you were able to say, well, okay, you don't have any consumers. So all the bits about consumers, I'm not going to bother with that because you don't need that. There's no point in me giving you 40 pages. That's actually something you're never going to need. So let's forget that. Let's concentrate on the 10 pages you do need, and let's mold those to be as close as we can to the way you work now. Because you know what? And I don't know whether you find this, Debbie, but it's certainly been my experience. Actually, your average company is doing things 80, 90% right. They just don't realize that they are. And actually, sometimes it's not a case of going into a company saying, you need to change this, this, and this. So it's a case of just saying, we need to document that you do this, 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 and this. And in fact, you might tweak it a little bit, but actually the main core of what they're doing, it's fine. Yeah, and again, I guess in part, again, that comes back to this whole, we keep coming back to it, but it comes back to this whole risk profile thing of, my view is, if I'm the owner of a company, do I want procedures which are 100% boilerplate law? No, I don't. I want procedures which achieve the legal result, but my staff can understand and will action in the way that they do. And part of what I think falls on people like ourselves through commercial work that we do, but also through the podcast that we do and so on, is trying to put sometimes why things are important rather than how things are important. Because if people get the why, against the mindset thing, if they get the why, then the how comes easy. And it is just a case of, actually, I spend time always with clients sitting there, talking to them, getting to understand how they work at the moment, what's important to them. And, what I always get over to them is the important things, like, you've got to have a data breach register. I don't care whether it's a sheet of paper in a folder or whether it's an Excel spreadsheet or whether it's a specialist program. I really don't care. They all do the same thing at the end of the day. What I do care is that you've got one and you put entries in it. Because if you're a reasonable sized company and I come back in a year's time and I say, can I have a look at your data breach register, and it's blank, I don't believe you. Because, and again, it's getting over this thing because again, with GDPR, it's the one thing that people really get hung up on, and I wish they wouldn't, is people think with GDPR, we must have consent for everything. Yeah. We want that. We must have your consent. We must have a tick box to say you consent to that. Why? I had a recent example with a company I started working with, I don't know, a year ago now, probably. I was talking to their marketing department and they said, we need to go out to each of our customers, each of our contacts, and ask them if they consent to us sending them marketing material. And I said, why? Well, because, we do. That's the law, isn't it? I said, yes, no. I said, I said, put yourself in that person's shoes. I said, again, this is where I always say, sort of wear someone else's shoes. So put yourself in that person's shoes. Every week, for the last God knows how many years, they've been receiving an email from you on a Friday afternoon with your offers of the week. Have they ever complained about that? No. Have they ever clicked unsubscribe on that? No. Then why now do you want to ask them whether they want to have that every Friday? They just do.
Right.
Yeah. I as long as you don't go mad, yeah, you don't suddenly start mailing them every day when you have been only doing it once a week. I said, or you don't sell, I don't know, machine parts, and all of a sudden you start mailing them offers about spaghetti, then there's not an issue.
Right.
Don't over, don't over. I just what I'm saying is don't overcomplicate the damn thing.
Right.
Yeah, if you've got clients or prospects or whatever who've been receiving that communication from you and they've had no problem with it, carry on sending it to them. Obviously, yeah, if they click unsubscribe or they say I don't want this anymore, yes, you need to unsubscribe them. End of.
Right.
But for all the rest, just keep going. Yeah, because at the end of the day, it's about what would you reasonably expect. Yeah.
Right.
If I take my car into the garage to be fixed, and they fix it, and then for 2 weeks after that they send me offers about what things they've got on offer on their forecourt. Hey, do you know what? Do I get upset about that? No.
Right.
If it's a garage that I've never had any dealing with in my life, suddenly start emailing me about what they've got on their forecourt, sure enough, yeah, I get upset about that, because where did they get my details from? But otherwise, no, if it's one you've been doing and they're a customer of yours, you know what? You'll get too stressed about it. No. And you know what? If they get upset about it and they don't want it, they'll tell you. So just carry on. And I think sometimes I'm trying to think how best to describe it. The rule is it's not a line in the sand. It's not saying, right, everything you're up to now you need to forget, and now we start from there. It doesn't work like that.
Yeah, I love your common sense approach. I love this. I have heard early on when GDPR came out, there was a church that they decided that they wouldn't do prayer requests, because if they did a prayer and they said someone's name, they thought that they would be infringing upon GDPR. I'm like, that's not what this means.
No. No, I agree. I had something recently, with, I'm not quite sure how it's being covered over in the States, but obviously, all of our thoughts at the moment are with the poor people in Ukraine and the suffering that they're having. And we're having, in the UK, we're having things with Ukrainian refugees coming to the UK, fair enough. And I was actually talking with a local authority who were trying to mine this afternoon. And they said, we don't feel that we can release how many Ukrainian refugees there are in each town and city in our state, because that falls under GDPR. And I'm like, no, it doesn't. I said, if you've got a city of 15,000 people and you're saying there's 2 Ukrainian refugees now in that town, how does that, how is that personally identifiable information? It isn't, I said, is that Ukrainian refugee walking down the street with a billboard saying, I'm a Ukrainian refugee? No, they're not. So where's the issue? Yeah. Yeah, and also there's a bit of common sense. Yeah, I said, if you need to notify the local health centre so that person can get health care, that person's arrived in the country and they're a refugee, then it just makes sense to do that. That's in their vital interest. That's one of the 6 conditions of GDPR. Yeah, you don't need their consent to do that. You're actually helping them by doing that. So just do it. Sure. If you want to put a photograph of them in the local newspaper, yeah, do you know what? You need their consent for that, because that's not something they'd reasonably expect you to do. But other than that, just damn well get on with it. Life is too short, and it's at the end of the day, I put it to them this afternoon that I said, at the end of the day, if I'm a refugee, I've arrived from Ukraine, I've got absolutely nothing. Am I bothered that you gave my name to the food bank so that they can give me some food? No. I'm not going to run into the ICO saying, they gave my personally identifiable information away without my permission, but hey, I got some food. Let's get real.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. Well, you touched on consent. So, we know the GDPR has these different legal bases, and people have gone kind of consent crazy. I do see other laws in different countries coming up where consent is the only basis, right? They don't have other legitimate bases, but the GDPR isn't that way. But I feel like people have, maybe it's this all the talks about cookies and stuff like that have made people go bananas. Like, they're going crazy about consent. Because I had someone ask a question and they're like, oh, if someone did this, then we need their consent. I was like, no, you don't need you may be able to fit what you're doing within the legitimate interest, because the legitimate things that you're doing, you need this information to be able to provide a service. So then why are you asking them for consent? That doesn't make sense.
No, I try to agree. People get too hung up on consent. They really do. Because there's all these other legal bases. As I say, legitimate interest is probably the most common one. If you need that information to perform whatever service that person's asking you to do, then you don't need their consent. You can just do it. Likewise, the contractual interest. If I'm an employee of a company, my employer doesn't have to ask me, can they process my information so they can pay me? Yeah, it's just there. I think it's true. I mean, but talking about other laws that are, but let's face it. I mean, GDPR, for good or for bad, is in a way, and I suppose I'm sort of take some pride in this, but it is becoming, if you like, the platinum standard for data privacy across the globe. We see more and more countries basing their laws upon GDPR. I do get worried though, but I don't know whether you've seen it, but there's this new data law that is emerging in India, where you have a data breach, you got 6 hours to report it. Otherwise, you could actually end up in prison. And I think imprisonment's going too far for GDPR, to be honest. I mean, I think if I worked in a country where you could be in prison for things like that, then I think maybe it's the time I'd stop being a GDPR consultant and find something else to do for a living. But
right.
But I think as well, the timescale has to be realistic. Now it's the 72 hours rather than the GDPR realistic. Perhaps. Is 6 hours realistic? No, I don't think it is. Could I make a reasoned judgment within 6 hours of a data breach of whether it needs reporting or not?
Right.
That's a tough call. Yeah.
I think, to me, I'm concerned about some of these regulations being untethered from the technological realities, right?
Yeah.
How could you know in 6 hours? Like, how could you even formulate something to tell anyone within 6 hours? Or, we're having these discussions too in the US where we have maybe lawmakers that don't understand how the sausage is made in the background and may not understand what it takes to actually execute on the things that they're asking. And as a result, we have people creating tools to say that they do this magical thing that people have asked for, but they really don't. So what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. I think there is sometimes too little part placed by the lawmakers on what is actually happening in the outside world and what's actually practically possible. And I think that's something that worries me here in the UK, where we had the government in the Queen's speech a few weeks ago announced the data reform bill, which is going to be looking at GDPR and how to make it lighter touch. And so far, that's all they've said is, we're going to look at it. We're going to look at how we can make it lighter touch, have less impact on companies. Blah, blah, blah. I'm actually really worried by that. And in fact, I'm one of the people who has signed a petition to government to actually say, don't do it.
Right.
And for two reasons. One, as I mentioned earlier, about the fact we've got 75% of companies who damn well aren't registered anyway, and let's concentrate on getting them on board before we start changing things. But the second thing is, and I think it's something which the UK has to be really careful on, is, we had this whole thing of when we split away from the EU, and I'm not going to get into the rights or the wrongs of Brexit, but we split away. And we needed UK GDPR to be said adequate, and the EU took until the 11th hour to do that, as they do. We're used to that. But what lots of people ignore is the little clause that they put in their data adequacy statement that said we can withdraw that adequacy at 24 hours notice. And that's the bit that worries me. That I think, if we start playing around with UK GDPR too much, and the EU suddenly says, do you know what? We're not satisfied that that's adequate anymore. We're going to say it's not adequate. We're going to pull adequacy. Now, would they actually put adequacy in 24 hours, even though the rules say they could? No, they won't. I mean, that's just for the birds. But I suppose they even said we're going to pull that in 90 days. Yeah. I mean, in a sense, short term, it'd be fantastic news for people like myself. It would be like pennies from heaven. But on a more serious note, it would throw the whole UK economy into meltdown. Because if you suddenly said to every organisation that's exporting data to Europe, you've got to add on your standard contractual clauses onto the contract, and you've got to get them signed, and you've got to get them everything else. Ain't gonna happen. Yeah. And I think that's the problem. And I think it's great that we got UK GDPR. I think there are little bits of it that could be tweaked. It's not perfect, but I would hate to see it tweaked to the point where the EU said, you know what, we don't regard it as being adequate anymore, because I think that would give us a very real problem. And that's why, I've certainly signed a petition to Parliament to say, please don't do it.
Right.
Because it's, at the end of the day, it isn't perfect, but nothing is. Life isn't perfect. Yeah, no. let's be honest.
No. To me, it's almost like abstinence education, right? So let's do nothing and let that be our standard.
Yeah.
As opposed to let's do something. It's like, no, it doesn't work that way. And then, I don't know, I feel almost like the UK is like in the middle between Europe and the US, where the UK and the US have very strong ties, especially on kind of national security stuff.
Yeah.
And so there's some shenanigans going on there, right? That need to be watched out for. But I think having the US having, hopefully less so in the future, more of a laissez-faire thing going on with our regulation, and the EU and US don't agree on a lot of this stuff. I think almost like the UK wants to try to be a middle ground in between, and I think it's almost impossible to do that at this point, in my opinion. So you have sort of a lack of law, lack of regulation in the US, nothing to really hold on to at this point, and then you have kind of a lot of regulation with the EU. Yeah. So then you're kind of in the middle where, I feel like, especially you share lane, you're connected, by a land boundary. That's important.
Absolutely. And I think the problem with that, as you say, is you can't be, as much as anyone might want to be, you can't be all things to all men.
No.
And so, you need to start, at the end of the day, the government needs to decide which side of the fence do we sit. Do we sit with the EU GDPR side, or do we sit with the lighter touch US side? And I know which side I'd rather sit, and not just because I've written a book about it. But no, I mean, seriously, I actually think, I mean, I had somebody the other day when I was speaking at a conference, and came to Q&A, and somebody actually said to me, did I think GDPR had achieved its objectives? And I said, if I'm totally honest, I said, it's not perfect, but yes, it has. Yeah, I said, because if you look back to the situation pre-25th of May 2018, when we had 27 different sets of laws across 27 different countries, some of which were good, some of which were bad, some of which were silent on different things, some of which were very verbose on different things. And we've actually managed to take all of that and put it into one standard, which we all work to the same standard. And I agree there's still an issue with enforcement that we got Spain and Italy who are sort of enforcing every man and his dog every minute of the day against countries like Bulgaria and Romania, who, I don't think some of them have issued one fine in all the 4 years that it's been going. But nonetheless, in terms of the law and its understanding, we're all singing from the same hymn sheet, and I think that's got to be a good thing. And as I say, then when you look at India, when you look at Japan, when you look at South Africa, you look at these other countries that have based their regulations on GDPR, and you're like, well, it must have some fundamentals then that are, CCPA comes to that. it must have some fundamentals that are strong, because otherwise, why would these other countries be using it as the base of what they're working to? And, I mean, I'm sure for you, for me, for anyone who works in the information security space, manna from heaven, ideal situation would be if we had one set of rules that covered the whole globe, because then everybody would be working to the same things. We'd all know where we stood. And in fact, it would then become just common knowledge, if you like. Everyone would just say, you know what? Yeah, I know what I'm doing. That's the way we work. That's what we work to.
Right.
No, we're still a long way from that. I recognize we're still a long way from that. And again, turn Ukraine for a minute. God only knows that the actions of Russia have made that worldwide thing probably now much less likely than they might have been. But the more countries we can get on board with the same basic concept, the better it has to be for everyone. Will it be tweaked locally for different jurisdictions? Of course it will. That's bound to happen. But if we can get the core concepts to be the same, then I actually think that would be sounds very profound to say, a better world for everyone. But you know what I mean? It would actually make a much simpler world for everyone.
Well, actually, I think you actually answered my question. I'm not sure. So my end question always is, if it were the world according to Keith and we did everything you said, what would be your wish for privacy anywhere in the world?
I think I've just said it really. I think my wish would be that if everybody adopted a standard, whether it's GDPR or some other standard, but if everybody adopted a standard methodology across the world, by golly, things would be a lot simpler. Now, okay, you could argue, wait a minute, well, that's going to do people like yourself out of business, out of trade potentially. Yeah, perhaps it would, but you know what? I'd like to think I'm the bigger man of that, and I think that the whole global picture is far more important than deny money, which is something that's difficult. But I think as well, and I think the other part of that is, the other thing that we've had in the last 2 years is we've all had to go through, the COVID-19 pandemic. Unfortunately, it's just touching anything woody can find. That seems to sort of now be at least manageable. How much better would that have been if we, and I know this is something the EU is working towards, but how much better would that have been if we'd had a standard similar to GDPR that governed medical research data, so that all the countries around the world could be sharing that data, all working on the solution at the same time, rather than, as I suspect probably happened, that you had different labs around the world effectively reinventing the wheel, because one had actually found that was the solution, but the others just didn't know it. And I mean, that gets me into the whole world of IP and pharmaceuticals, and that's for another day. But I think the more commonality we can have, surely the better it has to be.
I agree with that wholeheartedly. I feel like there should be some fundamental things that we should be able to agree on across the board, hopefully, with most of the world, right? So let's say theft of someone's data is bad, right?
Yeah.
So can we agree on that, and then build on those principles somehow? I feel like a lot of these laws, they're saying the same thing in different ways, and they may want to execute in different ways. But I think and I talk about the 5 fundamentals that I see in privacy regulation. So a lot of them, GDPR is kind of the crown jewel, so it covers all of those fundamentals, but not all laws do that. So maybe some only cover 1 or 2 or 3 or 4, or 5. So obviously we have differences there, and also how the prescriptive those laws are, right?
Yeah.
So where the GDPR is more like, hey, let's do what's reasonable, find a way to have it fit your company, where something like the CCPA in California is put a button on your website front page that says this. So yeah, there has to be a middle ground in there somewhere. So yeah.
Yeah.
Excellent. Well, this is so great to talk with you. Wow, I could talk to you for hours. This is amazing. But I would love for people to listen to your show. Your show is amazing. Your podcast is the GDPR Weekly podcast. Your book is GDPR Made Simple, is available on Amazon. And I hope we can have time to chat in the future, maybe do some collaborations.
That would be brilliant, Debbie. Yeah, I mean, you know, I think between us, hey, let's start this global motion to get things moving. You know, because I think it's long overdue.
I agree. That'd be great. Well, I'll talk to you soon. Thank you, Keith.
Thanks, Debbie. Really enjoyed it.